the study of the relationship between alchemy, economics, and the evolution of money, which can be read about in her older book, Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, as well as some previous writings too. But her newest book, Clock Shavings, describes her 13 years of personal communication with several entities from the great beyond and the insights they've given her into the plans of the elite, the state of our reality, and the hidden history that got us here. It is a wild ride I can't wait to take, and I'm honored to have her here. Tracy, welcome to THC.
Thank you so much. Wow, that makes me sound so exciting.
We know how it is with these attention spans. You got to grab them quick. But you are worthy of it. Thanks for being here. This is a real treat. I am a big fan of your work into alchemy and money, and I'm sure we can eventually get into that. But to start us off, this new book, Clock Shavings, is very interesting because I've heard your interviews over the years, and it's clear that you have a deep understanding of magic, certain entities, and invocation rituals, but you seem to deflect a lot of the questions that are asked about your own personal experiences. Didn't really want to talk about that journey a whole lot, but now you have laid it all out there, and man, does it include some far out stuff. I've read several excerpts from it. It is very interesting. But to start us out, I guess I would ask, what was it that got you to start taking this spirit entity communication stuff more seriously in a culture that, at least on the surface, really writes it off as largely silliness?
Well, actually, it would just be the fact that it worked the first time. The first time it worked, that intrigued me, and it was pretty much impossible to leave the subject alone from that point. So, yeah, it's just personal experience. I guess I hadn't really spent too much time thinking about it before we did it, which is basically, it started with my husband. Well, he wasn't my husband at the time, my husband-to-be. We were, roommates at the time, and we were running the magazine Dagobah's Revenge together. And we were doing some research into, Holy Grail related studies, Priory of Zion, things like that. And at the time, we were one of not too many people really pursuing that subject. And we were, I would say, among the experts on the topic at the time. We were emerging into that field, me and some of the other writers for the magazine. So we really just wanted to know more about the subject. I'm sure you've looked into that subject yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the listeners have probably. It's a very intriguing but confusing subject. You can just spend years following trails of clues and kind of get dizzy after a while. It all seems so interesting and meaningful, but you never really know what it's all leading to.
Agreed.
And so it's definitely something that can be kind of exasperating. And at the time, we just thought, well, wouldn't it be great if you could actually talk to one of the guys that was supposedly involved with the Priory of Zion, who was the artist Jean Cocteau. We were looking into a lot of his stuff at the time. We were trying to decode some of his paintings and films and writings to see if it pertained in any way to the Priory of Zion or the mystery of Rennes-le-Château, the story of the Merovingian bloodline, the Grail, and other occult subjects. And we were just trying to find greater insight into that. So we decided to talk to the guy on the Ouija board. And, we did get a response right away, and we talked to him several times. But I would say we got a very weak response in comparison to what came next. He basically told us that if we really wanted to get the answers to our questions, we had to talk to Cain.
Wow.
So Cain from the Bible.
Yeah, Cain of Cain and Abel, right? I mean, that's a pretty powerful entity there.
And well, I knew that from some of the research I had been doing and writing I had been doing, that Cain seems, at least according to some other historians, basically they think that maybe Cain was based on a real historical figure that can be found certainly in the history of Mesopotamia, but also there seem to be recollections of this figure in history from other cultures as well. That this is really one of the first kings and the king of an empire, really, and that it may have been basically the same empire that's remembered in the story of Atlantis.
Wow.
That he may have been like the king of a very large kingdom and very influential in history. And then the story in the Bible is really just a thumbnail and a metaphor for what happened with Cain. So anyway, I knew a little bit about that stuff, but obviously I learned a lot more once I started actually talking to Cain. So I would say that things really got rolling a few months into the conversations with Cocteau when we called up Kane instead and started really getting very interesting responses.
Whoa, this is wild stuff. And it's so awesome that you got that personal validation at an early stage because it's so key for people to not just write it off. Because when it comes to people's thoughts on communicating with entities like this, I think the mainstream, if you divided them up, the majority would probably give no credibility to it, think it's just silliness. And then the second largest group, I'd say, are folks who probably believe it has power but are very fearful or superstitious about it. And to me, that's the biggest clue that it's something to pay attention to because it seems like classic propaganda. You know, first deny all existence of it and aggressively claim that it's just a bunch of nonsense. But when that doesn't work, you say, oh, well, yes, it does have power, but stay away from it because it's all dangerous and evil. And right there, you probably got 90% of the population to avoid it for one reason or another. It doesn't really matter why. But do you think that's kind of what happened over time?
Well, basically, if you can talk to spirits from beyond, you're getting one type of glimpse of what's going on beyond our visible reality here. I'm saying that like we live very much cut off from the bigger picture of what's going on.
Right.
And we're meant to. It's clear to me that we're in some kind of prison basically, and we're being deliberately blinded from everything else that's really going on.
Yeah.
And I've only gotten just a tiny taste of what the truth might be. And so basically I'm saying, yeah, of course it's taboo. Yeah, of course they try to keep you away from it. And who are they? I mean, the governments throughout history, the religions that they foster and propagate, always trying to keep this, the keys to the kingdoms of heaven and hell, basically, out of the hands of the general population.
Yeah.
And you could say that's, that they're trying to control everybody, which is true. And also, in a way, what they say is right too, in that it is dangerous because you don't know I don't know what I'm getting involved in. No one else does either. I don't think. How could you possibly know? You're just like grasping. You're reaching through the veil. You're grasping around. And you don't know what's on the other side or what it's going to do to your hand. You're reaching through. So it is dangerous. It's scary. Oh, I can see why people see it that way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it is funny because I can get most people to acknowledge that most of history has been dominated by powerful secret societies and clubs, and I can also usually get them to acknowledge that these groups put a lot of energy into symbolism and occult rituals and practices of these magical arts or secret scientists, but people tend to not make the connection that maybe the magic or this communication with entities is a major reason why these groups have kept the power for so long, you know?
Well, this is what has really been so revealing to me. I mean, the experience of talking to them myself and also seeing the things that they tried to get me to do, because they did try to persuade me to do certain things.
Wow.
And they have a different, I would say, heretical perspective or a different version of almost every story from scripture. And it's always, portraying a different character, usually the bad guy as the good guy.
Yeah, I would think so.
It's an agenda, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's definitely an agenda, and it's really given me a glimpse into. I think they deal with other people this way. I think they deal with the people in the secret societies you're describing this way, especially the leadership. And I realized basically what a lot of these secret societies are based on, which is yes, this communication. The pacts that people make with these entities.
Man.
Basically the whole structure of an organization like, say, the Masons is probably based on something like this, where and they're probably dealing with the same entity, because after I was talking to Kane for a long time, we eventually got referred to Baphomet, and that's where we really got, I would say, even more insightful information about all sorts of things about history, magic.
And that is a really powerful name. But I'm kind of curious. You said that this communication kind of intensified with each, new being that you interact with. How did it kind of evolve and intensify? Was it changing of methods, or was it just way more obvious that a being was interacting with you?
Well, no, it was obvious the whole time that we were interacting with something. But like Cocteau, for instance, had a very hard time communicating, I would say. Most of what he would say is kind of nonsense numbers and letters. Then there was speaking in French, and I didn't even follow a lot of it because I didn't speak French very well at the time. And also just weakness. It didn't seem weak in the beginning because it was my first experience. But after communicating with Kane, for instance, I immediately noticed a difference of, intensity in, because you can feel the presence of the spirit as it's talking, as it's moving the planchette around on the Ouija board. You know, with a weak spirit that's having a hard time communicating and a hard time, I guess, garnishing the energy needed to communicate. It will, for one thing, have a hard time spelling out words correctly, a hard time saying the right thing. They'll forget how to say things. And then for another thing, the planchette just doesn't move as quickly or as powerfully. And when it really gets going, when it's very powerful, it sometimes moves, scoots out from under your fingers even. It moves so quickly that you can't follow what it's saying. You have to have someone else writing down the words, the letters as they're being spelled. And ideally, this is what we ended up doing, videotaping, so just so that we could go back and get an accurate transcript.
Wow.
And, so you'd be getting these messages, and there's no way that you or any of the other people could be projecting it. It's not coming from your subconscious or anything, because I don't have any of that information. I mean, there was some really complicated stuff that I couldn't have possibly known. No one else there knew. I don't have the imagination to come up with that. I'm not that poetic as some of the things they said. And furthermore, it's just moving so fast that your mind can't spell out words that quickly. And a lot of times they'll misspell things, and then they'll go back and correct themselves too. So
interesting. Let's talk about the Ouija board a bit, because I think for some people this is a red flag. Even people who believe in occult communication. I mean, I hear a lot of people say that they doubt the Ouija board in particular. And I think part of the reason for that is because it's made by a giant toy making corporation today. Even though they didn't come up with it, they only bought the patent from a guy who had it once once he died. The family sold it to them. But really, I mean, these powerful corporations, they know plenty about the esoteric arts, and anyone who examines their logos will see that. But in terms of the Ouija board, what might you say to someone who doubts the usefulness of it or the accuracy of it?
Well, I don't know what you mean by accuracy, but as far as when you're trying to divine a message from beyond, I would say it's the most accurate in that it'll give you a message, spelled out in words that you can interpret. You can have a whole conversation. Whereas, I mean, what else can you do like that except channeling directly, which I think is even more dangerous, because then you're actually kind of letting something more into you than I think you are when you're playing with the Ouija board. But not only that, the accuracy of channeling is just harder, I think, to gauge, because it's coming through your own mind. You're really kind of I think you run a risk of really putting things in your own words or interpreting, editing while you're channeling. So I think when you're doing the Ouija board with another person, it really kind of objectifies the whole thing, pulls you out of yourself a little bit, and you just basically become a tool, you and your partner, whereby they're able to write out messages that can be very clearly read. Now, if you're trying to, interpret coffee grounds or pig entrails or something, if you're trying to read tarot cards, it's much more open to interpretation, and also just vague. I mean, you can't get very specific answers to specific questions. So I just think if you want to actually talk to them, talk to something from beyond that might have the perspective of a being from the other side, this is going to be the most useful tool. And as far as the William Fuld Parker Brothers Ouija board, I mean, that's what we started off with Cocteau, but very quickly discovered that they had their own ideas in mind. Baphomet actually dictated a new Ouija board design, which we produced. It's a lot more interesting. And you can see that there's a little picture of it in the book, and we're going to put out a larger version of it that people can use if they want to. I find it easier to use because you have a little bit more space to move around in. It's easier to set the letters apart. The interesting thing about the design that was given to us by Baphomet, I didn't understand the meaning of it for months or maybe even a year until after it was given, because for a long time Cain and Baphomet both kept emphasizing the alphabet itself. They kept going through from A to Z and then B to Y, and all the way like that from the beginning to the end, and inverting it basically,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, what is the meaning of that? We kept asking them, what does it mean? We got different answers. Finally, I just was doing some reading one day and I realized, oh, that's the Atbash cipher that has been interpreted as being connected to Baphomet's name. The fact is, you can put the name Baphomet, I think it's, if you convert it to Aramaic and put it through the Aramaic version of Atbash, then the result that comes out is Baphomet.
Wow.
Oh no, it's Sophia and Baphomet. That's right. How the interpretation is that Baphomet basically is a code word for holy wisdom, divine wisdom, and that maybe even the Templars were using this cipher basically. So it's a cipher that, for one reason or another, is associated with Baphomet. It's been printed in books. They even reference this in the Da Vinci Code. I seem to remember that the character Sophia, they at one point mentioned that her name was convertible into the name Baphomet via this cipher. So, but I had totally forgotten. I didn't realize what the Atbash cipher was. I remembered reading about it, but I didn't know that what you do to make that cipher is you invert the alphabet. So that's what they wanted us to do on the board. And so it's been that way ever since. We've been using it. And it's interesting because it makes different patterns, actually. The way they zip around on the board, it just makes interesting patterns because of the way the alphabet is arranged sometimes.
That's cool. So, I mean, I thought your conversations with Baphomet were pretty intense and pretty interesting. Most people will know this entity as the goat-headed hermaphrodite, largely associated with the pentagram and evil things like Satanism. But how would you describe Baphomet? Do you think some of those ideas are misconceptions? Obviously, you were saying that the good guys become the bad guys, and there's a lot of manipulation involved. Is Baphomet a victim of some of that?
Well, I'd say that Baphomet is is the devil in a way.
Wow.
But it's a particular expression or of the devil. So it's the alchemist, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And he's kind of I say he, just, I don't know, because that seems easier to me. But the truth is that every time Cain or Baphomet would refer to Baphomet, they would refer to Baphomet in feminine. So as I think you mentioned, it's a hermaphroditic entity. I think that maybe the most important facts to understand what Baphomet is as an expression of the devil is to go back to you may have seen this sigil of Baphomet. I believe it goes back to this magician named Stanislaus de Guita. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, something like that. At any rate, he had in one of his books these sigils that were expressions of Baphomet, and on one of them, basically the front side of it, it had the goat-headed Baphomet inside of a pentagram, the inverted pentagram, and it said Leviathan around it. Oh, and it also has the names Lilith and Samael, which are two demons that I'll describe in a moment. And then on the other side, you have Adam and Eve. It has like the upward pointing pentagram, and it has a picture of a man, and then it says Adam and Eve. Now, the reference to Lilith and Samael is important because the way the Kabbalists describe Lilith and Samael, these demons, they're like the primordial demons. They say basically these guys are the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and it's a hermaphroditic serpent that has both male and female aspects. The male is Samael, the female is Lilith, and that basically these two guys were split purposely by God, and it resulted in Samael basically being castrated and separated eternally from Lilith so that they can't mate anymore. They can't have sex, because somehow if they do, it will result in the destruction of the universe. So you have these, formerly united serpents now separated and, in pain of separation from each other, and sexual frustration.
Mm-hmm.
And what it appears happened, according to, if you piece together all the different rabbinical, Kabbalistic stories about the Garden of Eden, the things that went on there, and then also afterwards, after the fall, the things that happened to Cain and Abel. And you start looking through all these things, basically seems to tell the story that Samael impregnated Eve and was probably the father of Cain. And also, reflexively, Lilith also seduced Adam and was his wife. And they have lots of demon children together that are out there in the ether somewhere, and they're menacing mankind. They're always trying to cause trouble for humans. And one of the things they're always trying to do, the Lilim, as they're called, the daughters of Lilith, is incarnate into human bloodlines. They seduce men. They their children are born and actually grow up in royal families. She's basically infiltrating royal and holy families to try to get her children in line for those thrones. And you see this going on in the Bible, and I think it's probably going on today.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's intense. I mean, obviously, bloodlines for the elite have been super important throughout history, and to think that maybe they're communicating with some otherworldly entities and they're being influenced or seduced, and that they're being infiltrated. I mean, that's pretty intense, but it fits the story because when you look at the deeper levels of the elite, they seem to be in communication with something for some reason.
Well, both Cain and Baphomet had a lot of interest in their human descendants on Earth. And in fact, that was their only interest. They wanted to basically kill everyone else except their own descendants. And that doesn't mean their descendants are safe. But when I say that there's some evil coming from these spirits, the ones that I talk to anyway, I would say what really made me believe that, was that they basically just displayed a very hateful, anti-human attitude. And it had everything to do, they said, with God's preference for us. Basically, the serpent was offended that he was asked, because he used to be an angel, he was asked by God to bow down to his new creation, Adam. And he didn't like that. This is a story that's in the Quran. You can also find it in a book called The Books of Adam and Eve, which is older than the Quran. And then this is a story that was told to us again by Baphomet, and then kind of referenced several times later, like, this is the real reason why I hate you. And so it's like nothing personal even, really. It's like, yeah, we're just the preferred younger brother, basically, or Adam was. And we're the children of Adam. And that's the source of the frustration. Also, of course, they were cast into hell. And it seems that happened after the fallen angels, the demons, actually tried to mate with humans, or did successfully mate with humans. And apparently this was a problem for God. And so he cast them into some sort of prison that's underneath somehow the world that we live in now, maybe in some other realm or something. Well, obviously in some other realm. And so they're very mad about that, and they really want out. And I think that they're trying to manipulate people that they have under their control here to get them out. And, they're right now they're working with secret societies and utilizing all of the mechanisms they have available, including the media, economics, all sorts of, aspects of civilization, basically, that they now control. The demons are using people to try to construct a situation that will somehow allow them to have one big jailbreak and all get out. But in the meantime, they're still always trying to get out, or to get one little foothold in this world. And what it took me a while to realize, but after analyzing the transcripts repeatedly over the years and looking at other clues as well in history and mythology, is that they're not alive, right? They're in some sort of nether realm. Their existence is kind of negative. And At one point, Cain even said this, I am not alive. Don't don't talk to me as though I'm alive. I can't relate to what you're saying because I'm not alive. Because they're not alive, they need to somehow, or they desire to feed off of the life that we have here.
Mm-hmm.
And when they can get a little bit of that, they hungrily feast on it. And also they just desperately want to get a foothold in this world and one of the ways that they do that is through people that they are able to possess. So, and yeah, they just, sometimes they literally, their motivation is just to be able to, breathe air and eat food and smoke cigarettes and experience life for a little while.
Yeah, man, this is where it gets really interesting to me because I've had several guests who talk about the constant references to the Abyss or the Great Beast, and there's tons of 666 symbolism out there. I mean, it's the logo for Monster Energy Drink, it's the logo for the Chrome browser and the CERN Center. And I think it was also at the Emmys, the stage was formed by three sixes on top of each other. And it's weird. I don't necessarily get it. And I'm also skeptical of anything that comes kind of from the Christian perspective because I grew up that way and felt like it was a lot of manipulation, but it does seem like there's something deeper there that it's built upon. I mean, do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I'm not here to promote any religious point of view. I'm just kind of saying what they said and how it does seem to match up with what a lot of Orthodox religions will tell you about how the world works. What's the universe? What's going on? And most of the religions will tell you, there's a realm below and a realm above, and there's good guys and bad guys, and here's what the bad guys are trying to do. And honestly, so much of that was confirmed by these beings, and it wasn't something that came out in the first conversation, but because we had a lot to talk about, I had a lot of knowledge already about occultism, secret societies, and things like that. So there was, I think, quite a lot of basis for us to build a rapport, I guess, with each
Mm-hmm.
other. And so I was able to kind of milk the stuff out of them, I guess. And also, I think they lose their ability to lie after a while, or things just slip out,
Mm-hmm.
or they get comfortable talking to you and they just kind of tell you, oh, by the way, we hate humans, we're trying to kill you all. Um,
Wow.
Whereas they, after months of talking about scriptures and like esoteric analysis of things, they'll this kind of stuff will just slip out every now and then. So
That's so interesting. I mean, do you think some of these 666 references that we see in the mainstream culture are part of this foothold that you were talking about that they're trying to get?
yeah, but I mean, I don't want to be too alarmist because, of course, it's ever since Jesus, basically, people have been saying that the second coming is happening and the end times are coming. So, I guess it could very well be they're always coming. This is an aspect of life. I think there's some truth to that. That the end is always near, but it does seem like in popular culture people are so comfortable with it now. And if you really want to be paranoid, sometimes just watch fiction television shows and movies. Sometimes even don't watch, but like look to the side and just listen to the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
You'll pick up on things that mean so much more outside of the context of the film itself. That you can think that sometimes I think these films, the story itself is like just the first layer. That's
Mm-hmm.
for the public to consume. And then if you look deeper, there's an entirely different, not just plot, but message. And so what I find is, say for instance, He-Man. Okay,
Right on.
my son is only a year and a half, but he really loves watching He-Man. And so we've been watching the whole thing. I've seen these episodes over and over again. Every single He-Man is about the same thing. It's about the fall of Eden, and it's about the apocalypse, which are connected events and possibly the same thing in a way. The end is connected to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Just there's Beast Man. There's
Skeletor.
there's a Beast Island, I believe, at one point. And so what you see over and over again is the story of there's the demons or the bad guys that are somehow imprisoned on an island in a castle in the dungeons. They're forced to work in the mines, and then they're always plotting to get out. And then what do they want to do? They want to sack Eternia. Eternia is Eden, and this is what the story that Cain kept telling us, and which a large portion of Clock Shavings is really devoted to and analyzing this story, is about the fall of Eden. He said the game of chess is actually based on this.
That was an interesting aspect to it. Yeah, the different colored tiles are actually like the merging of the two realms or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. Well, it's kind of complicated still. We're still figuring out some of the meaning of what was told to us, but the story that first came out, the way Cain described it, he said that the fall of Eden and the fall of Atlantis were the same thing, and that it was really a war, and that war resulted in the submerging of this kingdom, where at that kingdom there was this thing called the Ark. Now, in the story of Noah's Ark, the Ark is a boat, and then of course in the story of the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark is a something that contains the essence of God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the way Cain and also some of the other beings described it, because they all talked about the Ark, and what they all said is that basically the Ark was this, what they called one box of things. It is the treasure box. It has all the power in it, all the things that you would want.
The Pandora's box.
Exactly, the Holy Grail, and really all these symbols, the Grail that you've heard, the Grail can be a stone or the Grail can be a cup. Well, it's because it's all part of the same contraption. Mm-hmm. It's a box that somehow contains something that can give you anything you want, something that it is ultimate power, like godlike power. And once I started looking into the Eden story a little bit more, not only in the Bible, but then also some of the way some of the secret societies portray it in their rituals, I got a bigger idea of what he was talking about. And the idea is that, yes, there was at one point, the beginning is thought of as Eden. There was this treasure box there that contains, like I'm saying, this Holy Grail sort of object. And really the value it had was that it could give eternal life. That was really what Cain cared about. And he said that he wanted youth for himself. He wanted eternal youth, and he was trying to save Eve, his mother. He didn't want to watch her die. So that, his lust to contain and control this box, which then makes you sort of the controller of everything. If you have the box, it makes you in charge of everything somehow. He kept describing it also as the throne of Adam. So he said that there was this war in Eden over the throne of Adam, and it was also the Ark. And the war was between him and children of his, actually, descendants of his that had grown up and had their own kingdoms. And he said, I asked, what kind of war is this? What kind of weapons are you using? He said, swords and axes. So, then I'm thinking like Lord of the Rings, thinking about all these guys like in some sort of fantasy realm having an old-fashioned war with hand-to-hand combat. But then somehow that results in this whole kingdom going underwater, Eden. Years later, I looked into this whole story a lot more, like I said, and piecing it together also with the Mesopotamian stories of the flood, and all those stories link up to this object, the plant of immortality, supposedly. That was there in the realm of the gods. What it seems like is that almost all of Eden got submerged. But then there's this one part, what the Rosicrucians refer to as the supernal Eden, that was preserved. Like, in the Bible it says God put the flaming sword around the tree of life to keep it from Adam and Eve. After they ate from the tree of knowledge, all of a sudden God became concerned that they would eat from the tree of life and become immortal, and then nothing would be impossible for them, he said. Like, they have the knowledge of God now, and now if they can just live forever, they'll be able to do whatever they want. So I'm not going to let them do that. So he cut off the whole realm where the tree of life is, whatever that is.
It gets really tough because it's all seeped in symbolism, and it's probably not a literal tree, but it's something. It gets kind of hairy.
Well, it's probably not a literal tree, but I'm getting glimpses, the more I look into it, of what is it, and why, how does it provide immortality? And strangely, it has something to do with the consumption of blood and the consumption of vital energy.
Wow. Now, this is something that we hear about all the time in the conspiracy world that the elite are doing. I've heard really creepy stories about them doing full blood transfusion rituals with children. So the idea, this vampiric idea of consuming blood is not that, it's not really that far removed from modern times.
No, no. I mean, I think every day, if I went looking for it, I could probably find some news story that connects to this. Whether it's like a story of someone that attacked another person to drink their blood, or just a science story that comes out. And oh, by the way, there's this great anti-aging technique that comes from drinking the blood of young people. And I mean, there was a story about that just a few months ago, and similar things all the time. So yeah, I mean, it's true, and it's almost obvious if you think about it, but it's something that's been known about forever, that this is one of the ways of preserving yourself, is to consume the essence of things that are already young.
In a weird way, if you think about the efficiency of the universe, I have a lot of guests that talk about the universe being a perfect system and all this. It's kind of morbid, but it's almost like a checks and balances system for the population, because if you want to keep the older people around longer, you're going to have to kill the younger people. It's like almost like a weird balancing act to make sure that too many people aren't around, because you can't have one without the other. You're going to have young people growing up, or you're going to have old people sacrificing young people to stay around.
Well, I mean, it's hard to justify the value of keeping a population of elderly and not allowing young people to live. So,
Agreed. Agreed.
I mean, and of course, it's that's why I objected to what you were saying about keeping some kind of balance. I mean, how is it any kind of balance? Of course, old people that are participating in a system like that are basically just refusing to die or to age, and they're always going to just, of course, because any old person, any person who's an adult, is stronger than a child and is able to overcome them. And so if they choose, to just blatantly take something away from that child, including their life, the child has no defense. So there's no way that in a system like that you're ever going, it's not balancing out, really. It's just the old people are going to feed off of the young until there aren't any left.
Oh, right, right.
I mean, that's what I think is the inevitable result of that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't endorse that or anything, but it's kind of like a weird cause and effect. It's not something where like the elite gain immortality by eating a lot of pears. It's like the cause of their sticking around would also affect the upcoming population of the planet. It's just a strange cause and effect. But I also did want to ask you about one real world example of this agenda of the elite, and or maybe they're being controlled by the beings that they're communicating with. But you wrote about Obama's recent trip to Stonehenge, saying that it was a further effort from the elite to open up a portal between this world and the next. And I've had other guests who talk about this kind of thing, and that being one of the major agendas of the elite. Can you expand on that trip at all? Do you have any insights as to how it was more than just a trip to an interesting monument, but more it was like an actual attempt to further this agenda?
Well, I'm just sort of reading into things that appear in the news and in pop culture these days. Like I said, you see what can be interpreted as references to both these events in Eden that I'm describing, and also a future apocalyptic event. And just like you said, it's one of the what the event really is this opening probably of hell, but also it's more like the collapsing of a pillar. There's this image, there's this idea that there's a pillar between heaven and hell and earth, connecting all these three realms, and that if it's disturbed in any way, then it will collapse and they will all sort of join together. And some people think that this is what CERN is going to do. And in fact, CERN is all the people that run it are basically saying, well, we don't know, it
Right.
might happen. So, and then Stephen Hawking the other day is saying, well, that is what's going to happen. But as far as the Stonehenge thing, yeah, I mean, it's weird. These guys never just do anything off the cuff. Of course, there was a meaning to it, a reason why, I'm subscribed to the White House YouTube channel, and I always get pissed off every day. Like, why you make a video about that, but you don't make a video about this? And it's always some kind of self-congratulatory advertisement for how great Obama is. It's so disgusting. So anyway, this is just
Mm-hmm.
one of those. You're supposed to make him look cool and ooh, look at me, I'm at Stonehenge. But yeah, they choose which ones they're gonna do every day. And the way they presented this one, it definitely looked like he walks in and he's like getting the information from the curator of the place about where's the exact center of the monument and where's the sun on the solstice. It's over there. Oh, okay. And like as though he's like this master mason, who has this deep understanding of sacred geometry. And he's like, it's so wonderful being here. I can feel the power.
Mm-hmm.
And and then he like winks at the camera too as he's doing this. He's like spreading his arms out, pointing towards where the sun would be during the solstice, and he winks at the camera. And it's just kind of, I don't know, maybe it was meant to make him look like some sort of
Deity, yeah.
illuminated being. Yes.
I get that. I mean, for someone who's looking into this type of thing, you got to raise your eyebrow to something like that. With all the things going on in the world, we're supposed to be so afraid of ISIS. We're supposed to be so afraid of Russia. You're going to Stonehenge. The leader of our country is hanging out at Stonehenge. It does make you seem a little skeptical if you're clued into this occult stuff.
Yeah, and so yeah, I do see a lot of references really that could be interpreted as ushering in a new age that's literally collapsing these pillars and merging the worlds like I'm talking about and opening up the gates of hell, which is another thing that has emerged in the news lately. Joseph Biden said it, oh, we're going to follow ISIS to the gates of hell. And he repeats it like 2 or 3 times, to the very gates of hell. Hell is where they'll reside.
Yeah, I saw that too.
I mean, it could be nothing, but I just have my eyes open, like I said. And as far as is this something they're trying to do? Well, just from my own experience, I told you that they, persuaded me to do certain things. And it wasn't just laid out in the beginning. It was like I followed a path. I was pulled along like a fish on a hook.
Hmm.
Do this and you'll get this. Do this. And it was all about like, write a book about this, write an article about this, and present it in this way, or present this information. And then I had this whole, all the spirit communications was sort of under the auspices of what my friends and I were calling the Ordo Lapsit Exilis. This was our little secret society group. And eventually the spirits persuaded us to open it up to the public, take members from the public, get blood oaths from them sent to us through the mail.
Yikes.
And then they wanted me to write a book for the second degree members of the order. So I basically went into a trance one day and wrote this thing in one day. I didn't quite finish it, and because I got scared at the end, actually.
Damn.
It was a really freaky thing. Yeah, I mean, the document really scares me even to this day. But I put excerpts from that, large excerpts. Most of the document really ended up in Clock Shavings. The thing was called the Strange Service Manual, and in there, it's a manual for what the quartermasters of the order, who were also eligible to be priests if they wanted to. We were trying to form and organize a priesthood, as we called it, and in writing magic rituals for how to contact Baphomet and then form a contract with him for your local lodge. And you and your local lodge could do all these rituals, and it would have various results. So the book had all these rituals in it, and also just the description of what the order's purpose was and what it was trying to do, what the purpose of the relationship with Baphomet was. And so what it ended up being, like one of the last chapters of the book, was all about what was called the divine right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm channeling all this, this is the only thing that I've ever written where I would say it was as close to automatic writing as I've ever gotten.
Wow.
And anyway, so what it was is the divine right is this thing that we would do once a year around December 23rd, where we would do a ritual pretending to be crowning the Grail King. And that every year, as we would do, the ritual goes like this, that you crown him and then you sacrifice him. and then he is possessed with the spirit of Baphomet, and
Wow.
Baphomet rules through him, and he becomes this transcended being, and becomes then the Lord of the Earth somehow, and is able to rule the Earth.
Wow. Well, crowning him and sacrificing him, where have we seen that before? That's Jesus right there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. It's at any rate. So the idea was that we do this every year, and at the time we were also the Ordo Lapsat Exilis actually became connected to this other thing called the Dragon Court that I was involved in at the time. And guy running it at the time was Nicholas de Vere. He called himself Prince Nicholas de Vere von Drakenberg. And he said that he was the king of this kingdom called Drakenberg, and that it was like this right. Well, first of all, he said that he was a dragon. Dragons are like basically descendants of these fallen angels that I'm talking about. And he believed that people of this bloodline had extra special magical powers, and that they were the rightful heirs to certain thrones. But he called the kingdom that he ruled supposedly Drakenberg, and he said that he actually went around saying that like the government of England and other people in governments throughout the world recognized his kingdom, and that once it was created, they would give it official recognition.
Hmm.
So we were connected with these people at the time, and so when we were talking about creating the Grail Kingdom, we actually had this in mind, literally, that this guy was going to be the Grail King and be put on the throne, and then basically, play out what seemed to be the role of the Antichrist once you think about it. And the reason why we took his claims seriously at all was simply because that's what Baphomet told us. At the time, I was friends with this guy. I was trying to help him publish a book, or I'd told him I was going to help him publish a book, but I really wasn't trying very hard. I was busy with other things. And at one point, Baphomet told us that Baphomet, had cursed us because we hadn't fulfilled our requirements to Nicholas de Vere to help him publish the book. And we said, why do you care about Nicholas de Vere? And we're told, because she is related. Baphomet is related to Nick. So the spirits basically told us at the time that they were corroborating, in large part, what Nicholas was saying about himself. And if you think about it, Drakenberg is probably hell. That's actually the conclusion that I came to as I was writing this book, and what gave me enough chills to put down my pen and say, okay, I have to think about what I'm doing here. Because I'm basically describing a ritual that would open up the gates of hell, let this being Baphomet come through and possess this person.
Man, yeah. Obama doesn't need to go to Stonehenge. You're going to do the work for him.
Yeah, well, fortunately, or maybe fortunately, I guess, Nick didn't seem to have become the Antichrist at all. He's dead now, so
right on.
Someone else will have to play that role, I guess.
Well, I wanted to double back a little bit to the pillars collapsing symbolism, because of course we're recording this on September 10th. It's going to go up in a couple of days. I'm kind of sick of the 9/11 thing over so many years, and I don't want to do a 9/11 show every year on this date, but it's interesting. Do you think there is any type of occult, connection or symbolism between the Twin Towers collapsing and the elite trying to usher in this type of portal opening?
Probably. I mean, really, if that event was planned, and even if it wasn't a conspiracy of the governments, it was probably somehow, so many things are being coordinated by demons, I realize now, I mean, I know it sounds crackpotish to just declare that, but I mean, honestly, this is just what I think is going on. There are these weird coincidences that happen, and you think, how could the conspiracy be that vast? But it isn't. They're working through people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
In very subtle ways. So, anything really, could be interpreted as somehow being an omen of what might be coming down the pike here. And it's frightening to think about, because I enjoy living, and I don't want time to stop or anything. But kind of what they keep talking about is not just apocalyptic mass death and things like that, although that's part of the story. That's just part of it. And yeah, like you said, pillars collapsing, that's like really the end of the story, where what it results in finally is basically a separation, like an alchemical separation of elements, of the good guys and the bad guys, the good souls and the bad souls. And they get put into the things that are going to get preserved, get put into the ark, into the one box of things. And this is described in Revelation as the New Jerusalem. It's this cubic city that descends from the sky. And all the righteous people go inside, and their names are written in the book of life. If their name isn't written there, it's like you don't exist. You're stuck outside the gates of the cube. And outside is chaos.
Man.
And so this is what I think is happening. And there's a game being played right now where the demons, the ones that are trapped on the lower realm, think that they can play this game right in such a way that they will be the ones on the inside piloting the ark, in control of reality at the end. But got to play their cards just right, because otherwise everything that the book of Revelation says will happen, which is the preservation of these few righteous souls in this cubic city, as it's called. It's not really, I mean, it's a city in a very weird sense, not in a traditional sense.
Mm-hmm.
But everything outside is going to be utterly annihilated. So
does not sound good.
no, I mean, and it's not, and also too, you think, well, they'll be annihilated, so it'll be no big deal. You know, at the end, you don't, if you've been annihilated, you won't know it because you won't be there, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But for some, I don't think that's the end of it. I mean, it's described as the lake of fire. They describe this eternal pain, damnation. So, and I think it's kind of like the realm that they're in now, only maybe worse, you know, because the realm that they're in now, they say that they don't exist or that they're not alive, and yet you can communicate with them and they're doing things. So it means that they're somehow having to endure the pain of death, but there's still some consciousness there.
Wow.
So I think that somehow that's what happens in the end. And yeah, so I'd rather it happen later.
Or yeah, of course. Man, this is also fascinating, and it's a whole different take on a lot of things that are talked about in the conspiracy world all the time, but without this added context, so they seem a little bit off. One example, I've heard you say in other interviews that you don't think it makes sense for the elite to just leave us a code. You know, a lot of people talk about, oh, well, all these symbols and stuff, they're telling us what they're doing. They're leaving us a code to figure out. And I'm with you. I don't really think that makes much sense at all. And you kind of alluded that it's probably, the reason we see it is probably just for the sake of the magic itself.
Yeah.
And one more thing about 9/11 that I'm curious about is, you know, a lot of people talk about these references to it that have existed in movies and television way before the actual event. You know, in The Matrix, Neo's passport expires on September 11th, 2001. The Simpsons had a reference to it. The Rugrats movie had a reference to it. And now I'm almost wondering if this is the demonic muse, you know, the influence of the subconscious of humanity trying to push us towards that type of event. Just a weird thought, but I think that actually makes more sense than the idea that the elite have just been laying out the breadcrumbs way before the event.
Yeah, I think that this is beyond human planning, basically. So yeah, all these little breadcrumbs as they're thought of. Yeah, in a way they are breadcrumbs, because I do think that these things you're meant to meditate on them and kind of be entranced by them and be affected by them. But the purpose really is but through your mind contemplating it, that affects reality. See, this is the role I think we play. Why the demons resent us and also need to somehow take what we have and control it, is because we were put in the position of interpreting reality and thereby in a way defining it, if not creating it. You know, God's the creator, but somehow we're very instrumental in defining it.
Yes.
Through our perception. That's one of the things they need us for, and they're trying to utilize us, drive us like a vehicle to not only do certain things but believe certain things, because when we believe them, it makes them true.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I think that some of these stories and archetypes that we get exposed to over and over again Just that's the effect that it has. It has, like you said, a magical effect. Every time we're exposed to it, it is a ritual, and um, it doesn't necessarily matter whether we're consciously aware of what it means or not.
Right.
Although more and more people are becoming consciously aware of it, but it's almost too late at this point. I mean, I'm out of my depth completely when it comes to trying to analyze this stuff. I mean, for one thing, I'm not really as plugged into pop culture as others, so I don't know what's going on in music, and I don't even, I had to cancel my TV subscription a couple of weeks ago. I never even watched it, so I don't know what all is going on. But every time I look into it, I'm just overwhelmed. I could spend the rest of my life analyzing this stuff, and I would never, there would be so much more produced in the time that I spent writing about it.
Yeah, it is definitely confusing at times. But so let's say you got these demons or these fallen angels, these entities, and they've been persistent for who knows how long, thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. And now they're getting help from the powerful puppet masters on the planet. I mean, it seems like things are ramping up and this is a weird time. But I mean, what can we do to, I guess, fight back and not just like acknowledge it and sit and wait for it to happen? I mean, it seems like a pretty devastating time. I mean, is it inevitable? Is there anything we can do to have a more positive outcome here?
I think it might be inevitable, yeah,
Ouch.
if it's going to happen. So, I mean, little things like trying to, well, even that. I was going to say, a few years ago, I used to do interviews sometimes about economics, and people would say, "What can we do?" And I would give advice about, well, maybe, somehow trying to have, a revolution or create self-sufficiency for yourself. But that's just about preserving yourself from financial ruin. And obviously, there's no advice if there's a mass death from nuclear war or diseases. These things seem like they're impending and coming. And then the larger thing, of course, is the collapsing of the pillars. I really don't think we can do anything about that. It's a much larger plan, and it's been in the works from the beginning. This was all programmed in from the beginning.
Man. So I guess let me ask you then, if can you give us any other examples of events in modern times that to you might point to possible attempts to open portals or have some type of relationship to doing the work of these entities?
Well, everything that I might list would just be sort of a ritual and hypnotic effort, and there's many of those. But as
Mm-hmm.
far as actually trying to break open the gates, it's CERN. I mean, they've said that that's what they're doing, and it's all throughout their logos and what they choose to call their projects, the interviews that they do with what they say their experiments are. They talk about literally opening portals, but they say, oh, they're so tiny, these tiny little
Nothing to
portals.
worry about.
They're only open for a little bit of time, just a fraction of a second. Wait, I mean, how long does it take for the universe to end? How much of an opening do you have to make? I don't think that can be measured or described.
Right.
I don't know what makes they're so confident about it. I mean, I guess maybe they've got big balls because they've done so many things working with the models of theoretical physics, and they've been right, or they feel like they've been right. But I also think that I've always just thought theoretical physics is just kind of not totally crackpotish, but just as you're exploring the quantum realms of atoms, I think they just keep finding what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe isn't that part of the description of what quantum reality is, that you're projecting so much of it?
Right. The observer effect.
Well, I mean, it seems to me, this is my just amateur observation, is that they keep coming up with imaginary particles, and then they find them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the failure rate is, but it just seems like the more they look, the more they find what they think they're going to find.
Yeah, like the more energy or the more detailed the concept, as the concept or idea, the theory gets more defined, then
Yeah,
eventually they find it. And maybe that speaks to the human's ability to co-create the universe.
it probably does. But yeah, I don't understand what they're doing, and I don't think that very many people do. And that's really what's scary about it. No one knew what the people with the atom bomb were doing, really. You couldn't It's very hard to wrap your mind around it when they're trying to describe what they did to make that bomb. Well, and that's how that was a long time ago. What they're doing now is way more complicated.
Right.
And again, I just don't necessarily believe that they have a handle on the consequences. Plus, you got to think, what if these guys are just possessed mad scientists? What I experienced with the way that talking to demons changed my perspective, what I thought was reasonable and what I would be willing to do, basically and I basically thought I was just following the program because, hey, it's working. They're talking to me. I'm learning the secrets of magic. I might as well just follow the program because I'm learning so much. Well, if they're under a similar spell, whether they realize it or not from demons, then their perspective of what they should go ahead and try is warped, and they may know that they're opening a portal and think, oh, it'll be great. We'll bring the demons in, and it'll be a revolution. Like you've read the Book of the Law, and
Right.
the way Aleister Crowley portrays the apocalypse. I mean, obviously, he was being told basically he and his friends are going to be the top cocks in the new world
Mm-hmm.
order, and it's okay that everyone else is dying because you'll have your own seats of power and you'll be wealthy and be able to do whatever you want. Well, I doubt that. Uh, once once the gate is open, basically there's no restraint from these beings, and
Right.
I don't yeah, they're not going to
It's
hold their promises.
it's kind of like the sequel to Aladdin because we know Jafar turns into a genie, an all-powerful genie, and he's put in the lamp, and then he has to coax someone to bring him out. And then once he's out, he's like, "I don't give a fuck about you. I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna just own everything. You're screwed now."
Oh yeah,
So, well, man,
yeah.
this has been a real blast. I mean, it's depressing. It's definitely dark, but I always am willing to explore what's going on beneath the veil, beneath the surface. And if that stuff is dark, then so be it. It doesn't mean it should be avoided. It means it should be talked about and understood. So I really appreciate the conversation. I had like 8 pages of questions here. We got to page 2 and then just went off into crazy land. And I loved it. I loved it. But I hope someday we can have another conversation and talk more about the alchemical properties of money and the control system there, because that's a whole can of worms as well. But before I really do let you go, do you want to let the people know again about your website and where they can pick up some of your previous books and your newest book?
Yes. TracyTwyman.com is my website. Uh, it's easy to find too by Googling. And all my books are, at this point, I'm just forwarding everyone to Amazon for almost all my books, except the new one. I'm still selling pre-selling autographed copies. So in about a week,